Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Bird Brain 66. I'm Andy T. On my left side, or your right side, is
Brian Bretsch. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us.
today we're going to kick off the 1991 Conlon Collection. It was a collection of cards that was done in conjunction with the Sporting News back in the early 90s, 91 through 95. The set run is a lot of great cards. The great thing about these are all from the famed photographer Charles Conlon, and ton of Hall of Famers, ton of people you probably never heard of. Some we'd never even heard of until we dug into there and started looking at these cards. You know, a lot of great Cardinal history in here. So I'll let you go ahead and kick it off, Brian. What's some of your favorites out of this particular set?
Well, there's lots of favorites, like you said, lots of Hall of Famers in here, Andy. One of the things that I I love the great black and white photography on this. I mean, there's just some great shots of, like you said, Hall of Famers. Our good friend Jim Bottomley, Mr. RBI guy. I love the, again, not really many action shots, which is okay. It seems like these are all pretty much good head and shoulder shots, but again, just really sharp photos. I love the old time wool looking uniforms that they're wearing, but there's 34 Cardinals in the set. I think unless you think differently, but I think it's becoming more and more of a more difficult set to collect, just because of what you said to kick off the show with so many Hall of Famers. I haven't seen too many of the sets, a complete set out there available that someone could go and pick up. But anyway, I like that. Some of my starting thoughts. Who are some of your favorite players in this set?
Well, I'll just piggyback on what you just talked about. So these were available in a box set and also by the pack. So and it's a pretty difficult set to put together back in the day, if you're doing it pack by pack. So, and it's a 330 card run. Also, we didn't mention that, but I want to mention that. But not necessarily a particular favorite of mine, but I picked this particular card out, Bob O'Farrell. You can read what it says at the bottom of the card there. So he's talking about all the illegal pitches and illegal substances in baseball back in the day. So
the shine ball.
yeah, shine ball, emery board ball, and spin. Right. So I thought that was very appropriate for what's going on right now in Major League Baseball. And and his quote on here was, he said, "You name it, somebody threw it." So that's from Bob O'Farrell back in the day. And another thing, I got specs here, and the great thing about this entire set from 91 to 95, and a lot of the old and any older, whether it's Topps, Bowman, whatever, is that you had players that are identified by their nickname only with their first name, and a lot of times you didn't know what their real name was, and we kind of lost that over the years for some reason. So I always enjoy seeing some of the crazy nicknames that you come across, not just with the Cardinals, but overall in Major League Baseball back in the day, because there's nicknames out there. Three Finger Brown. I mean, there's a ton of them, that you can come up with. Chick Davis is right there. I mean, there's a ton of guys you can think of off the top of your head. I mean, so over the years, I just always liked that. Dizzy and Daffy. I mean, it just goes on and on back in the day.
Yeah, you can't get much more iconic than Dizzy and Daffy, the two Dean brothers. Here's one of my faves right here, Old Pete, Grover Cleveland, Alexander. Lots of great stories behind his card, but I didn't mean to jump in there. Who are a couple of your other favorites?
Raja, of course, and everybody take a look and see what that average was back then, 424. So he didn't really have any trouble hitting back in the day. So
I don't recall the stat off the top of my head. Maybe it says it on the back of that card, but didn't he win like the National League batting title like 6 times in a row?
I believe so, yeah. So, I mean, just the phenomenal players in this set. And the great thing, like you said, it's getting harder and harder to find these cards because I think people are finally picking up on them because, they weren't around too much even back when, they came out. I think most of the time you had to probably find them at a card show or something. I don't remember them really being out in retail anywhere. I think I
Right.
pick them up at some specialty shop or something whenever I got them. So yeah, very cool set. Like you said, the photography is great. And if you haven't seen any of his other photos, he's got one of the most iconic photos in baseball with Ty Cobb sliding into third base. Charles Conlon does. So check that photo out. So it's really cool. Well. So even and that's actually in the set somewhere in the 91 through 95 run. I actually have that card because I kept that one, even though it's not a Cardinal, because it's a cool looking
Right.
piece of photography there. I mean, when you're looking at the time frame that he took these pictures in, because that's one thing you mentioned. There was not action shots, but that one was of Cobb actually sliding into third base. So that was pretty phenomenal for back in the day.
One thing too that I like is how the ball caps kind of changed over time. Mort Cooper's the only one with the STL on the cap. Um, I'll talk about Bill here in just a little bit. The plain cap with a couple of pinstripes. You got Jim Bottomley, who hardly ever wore the cap, straight. He always had it had cocked at an angle, which was always
and that's a reflection of today's baseball players too.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody.
Yeah, actually, so Bottomley he was actually a trendsetter because he actually did it first. So
he was. So go ahead and throw out a couple other ones, and then I'll do the same here in just a second.
I always think of this guy because my grandfather, and he always talked about the great Cardinal teams when he was growing up and when he was younger. So Pepper Martin, I always think about it. Always reminds me of my grandfather because he was one of his favorite players. Along with Frankie Frisch and all Gas House. He just he talked over and over, and he went to this establishment where they had some adult beverages, and they would sit there and talk about I was a little kid, so I'm listening to them talk about these players, and I'm like, who are these guys they're talking about? I've never heard of these guys because I'm listening because I'm used to Brock and Gibson and stuff when we were a kid, and oh, this guy's not better than so and so and this and that, and so it was really cool. And they were talking about Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig. So this was back in the early mid '70s, when I'm with him in this particular place, and all his buddies are they're probably in their 60s or 70s at that time, so they were young like we were back in the day. These were their ball players and that they listened to on the radio, never saw on television. The only time they ever saw them is that there was happened to be a picture of them in the paper or something. But yeah, really cool. Brings back a lot of memories of, for that reason as well.
Yeah, I got similar stories to that, except it's with my brother-in-law. It was his grandfather, and I gave my nephew 1 year for his birthday a whole bunch of Cardinal cards. Gave him a really cool, I think it was like the 54 Bowman of Enos Slaughter, just so he could have something really iconic in his collection. And so my brother-in-law's grandfather came over and started talking, and he was amazed at how I could just name off players from the 1934, 35, and 36 team. And he goes, I actually was at Sportsman's Park and watched some of those World Series games as a younger guy in his teens or whatever. So that was kind of cool. But we're always talking about or hearing, hey, it's time just for the Veterans Committee for the Cardinals to start naming, iconic players who should be in the Cardinals Hall of Fame. And I stumped really hard a couple of years ago to get the great Terry Moore in the Cardinal Hall of Fame. I don't know if I had anything to do with it or not, but I just, like I said, wrote lots of emails and stumped hard for him. But here's a guy, as of 1991, was third all time in Cardinal wins with 153. So played, I would say, the majority of his career with the Cardinals, and he was instrumental in the 1928 World Series. So why he is overlooked and not a member of the Cardinals Hall of Fame is one that I always question. But anyway, other favorites in here.
I want to stop you there for a second. Yeah. You brought up the great Terry Moore too, because he's actually in the later year of this particular run of this set. But the interesting thing is there's not a lot of cards on him, which is so you can get one out of here, and I think it was at the McDonald's set. If you want to get something that's reasonable, other than his Bowman card. But I mean, there's really not a lot of cards out there with Terry Moore on it. So this would be an opportunity for a great Cardinal fan to find a card of Terry Moore out there, and some of these other players too. You said this earlier before we started. There's some players in here. These are the only cards that actually may exist of these guys from this actual Conlon collection. So I encourage you to check it out. A lot of great stories back of the cards too.
Yeah, here's another guy that I really would love to see get a little bit more love. I don't know if he's got the overall career stats to be a Cardinal Hall of Famer, but here's a guy that back in the day, I'm looking at the back of it because I don't remember the number off the top of my head, but as of 1991, when this card was produced, he still was the all-time leading outfielder for putouts in a season with 547, and the next two guys after him were folks who were, if they remember, the great Richie Ashburn was second and third behind Taylor Duhit. So again,
did you put up Frankie already? I don't remember.
I haven't put up Frankie yet. The Fordham Flash.
Yeah, another one of my grandfather's favorites. So I wanted to give him some as well.
Yeah.
I think you threw up Mort Cooper already.
Yeah. Pop Haynes is another one of my favorite. Just have always loved having. He's always had great looking cards throughout the years. If you're lucky enough to have some of his stuff from the 30s, he's just got some really cool looking cards. But you had mentioned something pretty interesting. I thought I had pulled a couple of them, so I'll turn it over to you for just a second. But some of these guys that we haven't heard of, I'm looking for.
Did you ever find it interesting when you look at some of the photographs of some of the guys? It doesn't look like they were ever young in any of the pictures that you've ever seen them in. They look probably in their 40s or 50s when the pictures are taken, no matter what particular year the card is. It's pretty funny.
Here's Red Ames. That's the first and only card I have of him in there. But what I'm glad you brought that up about them looking much older, because obviously they weren't making money playing Major League Baseball. I guess the only guy who really technically was Babe Ruth in New York. But all of these guys, either when the season was over, went back home to work on the family farm that they inherited or owned themselves. And a lot of them, were shoe salesmen, car salesmen in general, sold insurance or whatever, and had to have, full-time jobs to raise their family because they didn't. So I think, that had something to do with it. And remember too, these guys were wearing wool uniforms in the heat of a St. Louis day with all of that humidity, and, taking that uniform off and probably dropping almost 5 to 6 pounds. I mean, we just had a day here in St. Louis within the last week where it was the first time in 3 years with triple digits. It was like 101 out with the heat index, like 105, 108. I couldn't imagine wearing a wool uniform and playing baseball. So anyway, here I'm going to come up with another one. Although this guy is in the Baseball Hall of Fame, but and he's in as a manager. But this is my first and only card of him, and going through this set again, I'm like, wow, I've always thought I knew most of the Cardinal players, and when I come across somebody, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's embarrassing, but I'm glad that I, learn a little bit more. Here's another one that.
Well, you bring us something really cool too, as you and I were about when you're collecting anyway, because even you and I, we even go back into the 80s and 90s sometimes and run across a guy, especially in the 90s, you'll be like, I can't even recall when that guy was with the team or on the team, it's like, so, could have been just a brief moment in the sun for him in the major leagues, or some of them just happen to get a card for whatever reason and maybe don't even make it to the major league. So it's very interesting when you go back, and it's, it's kind of like a history book every time you open these things up and take a look at them. And like I said, again, check these things out, because a lot of great stories, a lot of great information on all the players in here. And I think what Specs was making 50 cents a week doing something, and that's the title of the front of his card. I got 50 cents a week. So, and to your point about these baseball players back in the day, and I think this even continued probably up into the 60s and 70s. A lot of them were, still had other jobs once the baseball season ended, because they weren't making the kind of money that people imagine that athletes make, now. And I think if you remember, you'll remember this. I think Nolan Ryan was the first $1 million player in baseball back in the day. Probably what 1980, 19 right around that time frame, and everybody thought that was.
Well, then remember the big argument here in St. Louis when Ozzie Smith became the first player to make $2 million a season.
Right.
And was he worth it just mostly because of his defense? Well, the answer was absolutely yes, as you know, leading us to 3 World Series appearances, 1 title. Got
Well, he's
screwed.
bringing in 3 million people a year, every season. So, you know, if you only charge $1 a person, so he was worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
I know that's terrible math, but there you go.
Hey, I'm math is not one of my strong suits, but yeah. So that's the other thing about these, and that's why Andy and I keep highlighting some of these, the TCMA collections or this Conlon collection, because if you are looking, and that's part of my goal when I'm collecting, I want to have a card of just about everybody who's ever worn a Cardinal uniform, and obviously there's stuff from the 1900s and then in the 10s and the the teens and the 20s and 30s where, like you were saying earlier, Andy, where they may not have been on the Gaudy card, or they may not have been on the gold medal flower card of the World Series team back in the 30s. And sometimes your only opportunity is to get this. And in fact, I'm looking at this George Earnshaw card again, and he only played 1 season for the Cardinals, and it was his last season in the major league. So he would spend most of his time with the Philadelphia Athletics. So, case in point.
You just reminded me of something else. And one of our biggest, obviously, the greatest Cardinal ever, Musial, I think we talked about this before. There's a period of time where he doesn't exist on card, like a run of years of tops,
right.
Missing out of the Bowman set. I mean, so what you got to go find the whatever happened to be out for that year that he happened to be on, where it was a Rawlings baseball glove box or whatever it was. That's the only time you saw Stan Musial too. So back in the day when they had those weird contracts with the baseball card companies, and he just wasn't interested in being a card. So that's again that I always think that's unfortunate for Cardinal fans, because we missed a lot of cards on Stan.
Definitely. Yeah, and my argument too, talked about this in the past. We'll have to kind of put together a whole little segment on this. But my argument with the Stan Musial rookie card is that it's not, in my eyes, not 100% accurate. And again, I argue this with anybody who says, "Well, I've got the 48 Bowman card, that black and white one, or the 49 Leaf one." And I'm like, well, I have a 1947 Bond Bread card of him. Why isn't that his rookie card when it's clearly, out before? So it's just, I don't know who arbitrarily decided that, and how can he have 2 rookie cards in 2 different years, which is also boggles my mind. So I don't know how that goes, but that's, again, for another show. But anyway, yeah, just I love this look. There's a lot of great players, from the turn of the century through probably the late 30s. There's a questionable Hall of Famer in here in Chick Hafey. Trying to remember how that story goes. It was either Pepper Martin or Frankie Frisch, who stumped really hard for him to be in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, I love that Dizzy Dean card. What did you say about his brother Paul?
Ducky. There we go.
Yeah. So there. Yeah, just I highly recommend this set if you're able to get your hands on it. It's just so cool, full of so many great players.
The funny thing is, because I have them in numerical order, because that's how I always sort my stuff.
And mine are in alphabetical order.
Right. So, but if you look the way they did it, so all those that are numerical order says Hall of Fame at the top of the particular card. But for whatever reason, like, you have, Hornsby, but there's not one with Hornsby that says Hall of Fame at the top of it, which is kind of odd, so.
You know why? I think he leads off this set. I think he's card number 1 in this, and he's in a Cubs uniform, and I bet it's written.
Well, I try to ignore that.
Sorry, I didn't mean to open up any wounds. Here, they want me to leave for a second and get a thing of salt and throw it in that open wound.
Yeah, I knew that, but I thought you could at least throw him in the the Cardinals with the Hall of Fame on there.
True. So. That's where he didn't make his bread and butter, so to speak. But that's where he put up all of his Hall of Fame
Well, that's what I'm saying, because
Yeah.
that particular card like that didn't make particular sense to me. But
Okay. Well,
as we always find, there's always a card or two or three in a set that we're like, what in the world were you thinking, or why didn't you do that?
okay. And then I'll kind of wrap up some of my favorite cards here in just a second with and another guy. I'll show him in just a second. I've got a great I love the Billy Southworth card in there too. I've always been a big Billy Southworth fan, but this was the one that I'm going to throw up, not throw up as in be sick, but throw up for debate terms of, or bring it up for debate. Let me correct my English a little bit. Here's a guy that spent the majority of his career with the Browns and with the Cardinals. And when I put together this set, I was always under the mindset that this guy was a Cardinal. And I know that it says at the bottom of the card that he led the AL in walks one season with, I believe it was like 111 walks. So at least we know that some of the current Cardinal pitchers got a little ways to go yet before they surpass that mark with the way that they're pitching this year. That could happen. But so I have this one in my collection. You don't. That's another one of those where it's kind of open for debate. But yeah, I've always had, I don't even remember when I acquired it, but I've always just, when people want to come over and look at cards or talk cards, if I got that 91 book laying around somewhere, I always say, hey, I know you want to look at some of the older stuff, but like we talked at the top of the show, this is just a great opportunity to collect really cool players and the opportunity to have cards of guys that you're never ever going to have because they just weren't produced back in the day. So. Yep. Anyway, any other closing cards that you want to show, or should we get ready to wrap up?
I think we just go ahead and wrap it up. I encourage people to go out there and check it out. If that Cardinals are their favorite team, or what other favorite team happens to be back in the day, obviously over time we've added teams to Major League Baseball. So obviously there are teams in there that didn't exist back in the day. So including the Browns, because now they're no longer around. They are now the Orioles. So.
Right.
Just little tidbits out there for everybody. So,
yep, very cool. All righty, everyone. Well, thank you for joining us for this edition of Bird Brain 66. We've got some really cool guests lined up. We're working with their schedules and ours, so just stay tuned for that. But as I always close every show, you can find us on Facebook at BirdBrain66, our Twitter handle at BirdBrain66. And of course, we'd love it if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel, BirdBrain66. And always got to thank you.
I could remember that too.
What's that?
You think I could remember one of those?
That's all right. But I always thank Andy because he does the heavy lifting of the editing for the programs. And he had some fine tuning to do to our last show with our last guest, but it worked out very well. So on that note,
check that one out. That's a great one.
Yeah, that's a great one. Brad Ripplemeyer. Appreciated him being a guest. So anyway, I'm Brian Bretsch. I thank you for joining us for Bird Brain 66 and my great friend here,
Andy T. Thank you again. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Till next time, everybody. Peace.